All right, so we're still working with right triangles, but this time we're working with something we call a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Okay, so our 45, 45, 90 triangle comes from a square. Okay, so here we have 2, 2. If I cut this square in half, I make a right triangle because we know that these angles here should be a right angle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and to figure out what my diagonal is here, I'm going to go ahead and use Pythagorean theorem. Oh, man. I'm going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Right, so 2 squared plus 2 squared gives me 8. That equals c squared. And then I go ahead and take the square root of 8, and I get 2. Wait, not 2. What am I doing? 4 times 2 gives me 8. Sorry, 4 times 2. We do have to simplify it. We're not going to leave it as a decimal. We're going to leave it as a simplified radical. So we can take the square root of 4, and that gives us 2. We can't take the square root of 2 and get a whole number, so that one is going to stay trapped in the square root, and that is what my c equals. Okay? All right. Looking at the next one, we do the same thing. So we draw on our diagonal. This is my right angle. This is my A, this is my B, and we're looking for our C, our hypotenuse. So 3 squared plus 3 squared equals C squared. 3 squared plus 3 squared gives us 18. This equals C squared. We take the square root to get our C, but we can't take the square root of 18 and get a whole number. So I'm going to break it down into 2 numbers. Okay, one being a perfect square, so I can take the square root of that. Oh, I didn't need that 2. Okay, and so we can take the square root of 9 and get a whole number. That gives us 3, but we can't take the square root of 2 and get a whole number. So that's what we get here. Okay, we're going to do the same thing one more time. This time where our sides are 4. So we're looking for this diagonal right here. We don't know what it is. This is my A, this is my B. And our diagonal is our C, our hypotenuse, because it's the side across our right angle. Okay, so we're going to set it up. 4 squared plus 4 squared equals C squared. 4 squared plus 4 squared gives us 32. We take the square root to solve for x, and we can't take the square root of 32 and get a whole number. But we do know that 16 times 2 gives us 32. Okay. Now we can take the square root of 16 and get a whole number. That gives us 4. We can't take the square root of 2 and get a whole number, so that stays trapped in the square root. So then from there, you need to recognize, well, what do all of these have in common? Okay. So if you notice, they all have a square root of 2 in common. Okay. And since they have a square root of 2 in common, we look, okay, well, what else do they have that's significant? So here we have a 2, and that's the side. The number up here in the front is a 3. That's the side of our triangle. Here, this is 4. That's the side of our triangle as well, the leg of our triangle. So here it says, our answers to the problems above are proof of the following theorem. Our 45, 45, 90 triangle. In a 45, 45, 90 triangle, both legs are congruent, and the length of the hypotenuse is the square root of 2 times the length of that leg. So pretty much what we found here, whatever these numbers are, to find the hypotenuse, you take that number and multiply it times the square root of 2. Okay? So, okay. For these problems, I am going to create a table to organize my work, or to organize my information. Okay? Oh, so here we have our 45, 45, 90 triangle. Okay? The side of your 45 is our leg, which is x, so x, x, and then the side across our 90, which is our hypotenuse, is x times the square root of 2. So then we need to find the other 2 missing sides. Okay. Well, they give us that this side is 16. This side is across our 45-degree angle. It's one of the legs, so that means this other leg also has to be 16. So these two are 16. And then our hypotenuse, which is the longest side here, is this one right here. So we're going to go ahead and fill that in, or plug in 16 instead of x, and it'll be 16 and the square root of 2. That's it. Okay, so moving on to the next one, or let me label it on here. This one is 16 and the square root of 2. All right, moving on to the next one. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to organize all our information. So we have 45, 45, 90. Sorry, my pen is not cooperating very well today. Okay, so then from there, we have x, and the square root of 2. So the two sides across your 45 are your legs, which are x and x. So these two right here are my legs. In this case, one of my legs is 12. So all I gotta do is plug in, so 12 and 12. And then my third leg is my hypotenuse, which is my longest side. Okay, so to get that one, we're gonna take 12 and multiply it times the square root of 2. Okay, and that's it. That's my missing side, 12 square root of 2. Oh. Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing again. We set up our table. X, oh, I did it backwards. X and the square root of 2, that's okay. Which is my 45, 45, 90. Okay. Now, my two legs, the two sides that make the right angle, those are considered your two legs, are these two right here. They're my x. In this case, we know what one of the legs are. We know the leg is 7. So these two are 7. And then the third leg, we don't know what it is, but we can easily find that because it's across my 90-degree angle, and we already know what x is. We know that x is 7, so it's going to be 7 and the square root of 2. Okay, the next one. Okay, now this one on number 7, this time they give us the hypotenuse. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make my table. We have x, and the square root of 2. I did it backwards again. And then 45, 45, 90. Okay, this time they give us the hypotenuse. They give us the hypotenuse is 9 and the square root of 2. So here I'm going to go ahead and plug in the 9 and the square root of 2. So this one is a little bit obvious. Well, what is x? Well, the square root of 2's are already the same, so that means x must equal 9. So these two legs should be 9. 9 and 9. Oh. These two. Okay, same thing for the next one. We set up our table. Okay. We have 45, 45, 90, x, and the square root of 2. Okay, so here we check, this is 5 and the square root of 2. It's across my 90 degrees, so it's going to go in this box. Okay, just because it has the square root of 2 doesn't mean you're going to automatically assume that it is 5 and the square root of 2. So just be very careful. It goes across the 90. And then these two are my legs. Those are my 45. So just like the other problem, it's pretty obvious that x is equal to 5. So that means this is 5, this is 5. I label it also on my diagram. This is 5, this is 5. Okay, seems a little repetitive, so I'm going to skip number 9 because it's the exact same thing. Okay, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So I don't want you guys to get too ahead of yourselves. Make sure you set up your table every time so that you do not make this mistake. So you have 45, 45, 90, which is x, and the square root of 2. Okay, your two legs, remember, make up your right angle. Okay, those are your x's. I know you see 9 and the square root of 2 here, and you want to fill it in the last box, but you can't do that because that's not the one across your 90. This is my 90-degree angle right here. Oh, this is my hypotenuse. So we don't know what the hypotenuse is. We know that the legs are 9 and the square root of 2. Okay, so be careful. Okay, they do that on purpose to trick you. So 9 and the square root of 2. Okay, So then when I do plug this in here, my x is 9 in the square root of 2. But for your 90-degree angle, you have to multiply whatever x is, you have to multiply it times the square root of 2. Okay, and then we're going to have to simplify this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and simplify it here to the side. The square root of 2 times the square root of 2 gives you the square root of 4. So we have 9 in the square root of 4. We know that the square root of 4 is 2. So 9 times 2 gives us 18. So that means that the third side is 18, the longest side. Okay. So let's go ahead and try this again. So here we have a 45, 45, 90, which is x, x, x in the square root of 2. Okay, so my x's are 8 in the square root of 2, and the 8 in the square root of 2. Okay, how did I figure that out? Well, those ones are across your x, which are these two sides right here. And then across your 90-degree angle, across this one is going to be our longest side, which is this one. Okay, so we plug in, instead of x, we plug in 8 in the square root of 2, because that's what x is. But then we still have to multiply that times the square root of 2. So we're going to do the same thing like we did on the last problem. The square root of 2 times the square root of 2 gives us the square root of 4. We can take the square root of 4 and get a whole number. That's 2, and 8 times 2 gives us 16. So this number should be 16. All right. 12, same thing. So let me go ahead and move on to the next section. So here, number 13, we have that this time they give us the hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse is 8. I know it's a hypotenuse because it's the longest side and it's across from the 90-degree angle. So I set up my table. I have 45, 45, 90. Oh, that's a big degree side. All right, so it's x, 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 and the square root of 2. So this is the part that does get just a tiny bit tricky. Okay, so since this is across my 90-degree angle, my pen doesn't want to write. There you go. And we know that it is 8. We have to put the 8 here. Okay, we have to put it under the 90. So then this one is not as obvious as to what x is. So unfortunately, we're going to have to solve for x. So x in the square root of 2 equals 8. Okay. Well, if x in the square root of 2 is equal to 8, then to solve for x, we're going to have to divide both sides by the square root of 2. So we get x equals 8 divided by the square root of 2. Okay, and then from there, we can't just leave it like that. We have to rationalize it. So what rationalize means is you can't have a square root of 2 on the bottom, so you need to multiply the top by the square root of 2 and the bottom by the square root of 2. Okay, so then x equals 8 in the square root on top, and then square root of 2 divided times square root of 2 gives you the square root of 4. And we know that the square root of 4 gives us 2 in the denominator. Okay, so now we got rid of the square root on the denominator. So now all we got to do is 8 divided by 2 gives us 4. So it'll be 4 and the square root of 2. So I'm going to fill it in here. 4 and the square root of 2. And that's it. Okay, so that means that these two legs are equal to 4 and the square root of 2. So they give us this is a 14. This is a hypotenuse because it's a side across of the right angle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make my table. So we have 45, 45, 90. Which is x, 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 and the square root of 2. Okay, and so the x of 2 is your 14, okay? Because it's across your 90 degrees, that actually gives you 14, okay? And we need to find the other two legs. So the way that we find the other two legs is, since x in the square root of 2 is equal to 14, we have to set it up like that. X in the square root of 2 equals 14. We go ahead and divide both sides by the square root of 2 to solve for x. So it doesn't want to write there. Go there. This cancels. And then we get x equals, remember we can't have a square root of 2 on the bottom, so we need to cancel it out by multiplying the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. We have to rationalize the denominator. All right, so then we end up getting 14 and the square root of 2 on the top. And then on the bottom, the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 gives us the square root of 4. And we know that the square root of 4 is 2. Okay. And the last step, we can go ahead and take 14 and divide it by 2, and that gives us x equals 7, because 14 divided by 2 gives you 7, and the square root of 2. So that means that these two sides, since they're both equal, are both 7 and the square root of 2. Okay, so this side is 7 and the square root of 2. And this side is 7 and the square root of 2. All right. So the next one more time, just in case you didn't get it that time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make my table. I have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Okay, my sides are x, 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 and the square root of 2. Okay, then we go ahead and see, well, what information did they give us? So they gave us that this side is 7, and we need to find the other two sides. Okay, so since this is across my 90-degree angle, my 7 is going to go right here. Okay, so we set it up, x in the square root of 2 is equal to 7. We solve for x by dividing by the square root of 2 on both sides. We get x equals, now we can't have a square root on the bottom, so we do have to rationalize it, meaning we're going to have to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. And on the top we have 7 and the square root of 2 divided by square root of 2 times the square root of 2 gives you the square root of 4. We know the square root of 4 is 2. And then we can't take 7 and divide it by 2 and get a whole number, so we're just going to leave it like that. That would be simplest form. So this one right here is 7 and the square root of 2 over 2. So once you pick up on the patterns, this becomes a little bit more easier for you guys to work out. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at the next one. This one, we still have our 45, 45, 90 triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and make my table. I have 45, 45, 90. And then it's x, 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 and the square root of 2. So we go ahead and see, okay, what side did they give us? So they give us one of the legs. They give us this leg right here. It's across my 45-degree angle. That one is square root of 5. Okay. That means that the other leg is also square root of 5. Okay. So then when I plug it in here instead of the x to find the 90-degree angle, because that's what x is equal to, x equals the square root of 5, I'm going to plug it in here instead of the x, and then you multiply it times the square root of 2. Okay. Now we just got to simplify that. So if we're going to simplify that, remember there's a rule that says you can actually multiply the two numbers even though they're not in the same square root. So square root of 5 times the square root of 2 gives us the square root of 10. We see if we can simplify it. If we can, then simplify it. If not, that's the way it stays. I don't know why the 1 came out like that. So this side here is the square root of 10. All right, the next one. I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to go ahead and set up x, 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 and the square root of 2. Okay, and this is 45, 45, Okay, so here, 2 in the square root of 7, that means this side is 2 in the square root of 7 because these are our two legs, they're across the 45-degree angles, meaning that they should be exactly the same, okay? We're looking for the hypotenuse, we don't know what it is, and we know that's our hypotenuse because it's the side across the 90-degree angle, it's the longest side. Okay. So since I know that these two sides are 2 in the square root of 7, and that's what x is equal to, I'm going to go ahead and instead of x here, I'm going to write 2 in the square root of 7, okay? And so you take whatever x is and you multiply it by the square root of 2. The same rules apply, you can multiply the square roots. So the square root of 7 times the square root of 2 gives us the square root of 14. And that's it. If we can simplify 14, we simplify it, but unfortunately on this one we can't. Okay, so that means this one is 2 square root of 14. All right, the next one, we do the same thing. We have our 45, 45, 90 triangle, which is x, x, x in the square root of 2. And then we go ahead and see what information they give us. So they give us this side is 11, which is directly across the 90-degree angle. So that's going to go in the last box. So I'm going to put the square root of 11 here. And then we are looking for the two legs of the triangle. Okay, so in order for us to find the two legs, we need to solve for x. So we take x in the square root of 2, set it equal to the square root of 11. And then we go ahead and divide by the square root of 2. We do to one side, we do to the other side. This cancels, and here we get x equals. Remember, we can't have a square root on the bottom. There's a rule that we can't have a square root on the bottom, so you have to cancel it out, and we do so by multiplying the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. So on the top, we're going to get 11 times 2 is 22. Remember, we can actually multiply what's in the square root divided by the square root of 4. Okay, and then we can take the square root of 4 and get a whole number. We get the square root of 22 over 2. Now, we can't divide these two numbers because a 2 isn't under a square root, so it's just going to stay like that. So the square root of 22 over 2. All right, and the last section. It says, find the length of all the sides of each triangle, round your answer to the nearest 10. So on this one, we are going to set up our table. So we have our 45, 45, 90. X, x, x in the square root of 2. And then we go ahead and see what they give us. So they actually give us one of the legs of our triangle. So the other leg must also be the same thing. So they both must be 5.8. So I'm going to go ahead and write that here. Now they do say that we can leave our answer to the nearest 10th. So that I'm going to plug it in instead of x here. I'm going to put a 5.8. And remember the one across the 90, we have to not only get the x, but take the x and multiply it times the square root of 2. Okay, so because they do want the answer rounded, I'm just going to plug it into my calculator exactly the way I see it. 5.8 times the square root of 2, and that gives me 8.2. So x equals 8.2. All right, but it's not even x. I better erase that. It's not x. It's actually this hypotenuse. So I'm just going to put a little arrow. All right, and the last section, or the last problem, this one is 6.6. That one is across my 90-degree angle. That's what they give us. So I go ahead and set up my table. 45, 45, 90. X, x, x in the square root of 2. And then
then they did give me the side across the 90, so that means that the 6.6 should go in this last box. 6.6. So we set x in the square root of 2 equal to 6.6, and we solve for x to find the other two sides. So what we're going to do is to solve for x, we cancel out the square root of 2 by dividing by the square root of 2. This cancels x equals, and since we're giving the answer in a decimal and not radical form, we can go ahead and plug it into our calculator exactly the way we see it. And this gives me 4.7 if we round. So that means that these two are both 4.7. And those are our legs. And that's it. Thank you guys. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.